So we're going to pick up where we left off with the previous video. We're adding two additional components here. We're bringing back in the motion sensor, and we've added a 5-volt relay, and we've got a bit of a mess. Normally you'd want to have a cleaner kind of working space than what we have here, but this is what we have to work with, and we're prototyping here. Just to kind of help navigate what we're actually looking at, the one issue with the smaller Arduino board versus something like the Mega, which is a slightly bigger one, there is only one 5-volt out pin. And so when you have something like the relay or a sensor such as the motion sensor or the rotary sensor, you can only provide power to one unless you kind of work out a different way of doing that. And so something I've introduced into the mess here is a miniature breadboard. And so you can kind of see that there's a one pin that comes from the 5-volt into this. And anything on that line there, if we connect to it, will be providing that power, branching it out to the different components. So that's kind of what's going on here. And then here is kind of providing ground to these 4 different components as well. We have our relay connected to pin 7. We have our motion sensor connected to pin 8. We've left our rotary sensor connected to the analog A0, and we still have our LED pin here connected to 13. So we're going to jump into programming this. We're going to make a more complex program. The reason being I'm interested in showing how different components can work together, and you can use these things to create a more complex program. So let's jump into the programming. So here I've uploaded the previous sketch that we had for the last video where we were working with the rotation test. Let's rename this again. So we're going to go down to save as. We have so many different elements now that why don't we say we're going to call it combined. Okay, so that's our new file name. Save that. And the first thing we're going to do, we've added 2 new components. We've got to introduce those to the Arduino. Again, it's like setting the table. So we're going to put the data type, going to add the relay. So we're going to call it relay pin. Again, you can call it whatever you want. That was connected to pin 7. And then we also introduced reintroduced the motion sensor. So we're going to call that motion pin. And that was connected to pin 8. And so we're going to do that. So that kind of puts it into the program. Now we've got to tell the program again how we're going to deal with those 2 new pins. So we're going to say pin mode, relay pin. This is going to be an output. And then our sensor pin, like previously, is, we're going to call it motion pin. It's an input. And that's connected to pin 8. We still have our serial monitor. We're going to keep that. So we're going to jump down into the void loop now that we've kind of established these 2 new pieces and have set them up. They're now in our workspace. They're set up, ready to use. I wanted to introduce the one new component that we have and create a value for it. So we're going to call it motion value. Last time we used it, this motion sensor, we called it sensor value. Here we're going to call it motion value. It's not an analog pin, so we're going to say digital read motion pin, because that's what we're calling it. So now it's going to read that pin and give this motion that value. Now because it's digital, it's either on or off, which is represented with a 0 or a 1. 1 being on, off being 0. Actually, often when you look at a lot of components, you'll see a 0 and a 1 on the on and off switch, and that's kind of reflecting that binary 0 and 1 on-off nature. The analog pin is still going to be reading from 0 to 1023. Something I want to add into this, we're going to make a slightly more complicated serial print. And so I mentioned before that if you just have serial print, the next line will be connected to this one. This time what we're going to do is that the very first thing that will pop up, we're going to say rotation, and we're going to say equals. We're going to give it a space after the equals and then quotation, and we're going to close that off. Between the quotation marks, that's what's going to be printed in the serial monitor. If it was just left as this, it would just continue to print rotation equals on the same line for eternity. But we're going to add a second line, serial print line, typo here, print line, and we're going to keep it at that rotation value. And so now what's going to happen, I have a spelling mistake there, okay. Now what's going to happen is we have the ln in there, which kind of closes off that line in the serial monitor. It's going to say rotation equals, and then whatever the value is. So as the dial goes up, it goes up. As it goes down, it goes down. We also want to keep track of what's happening with our motion sensor. And so we're going to add the same thing below that. We're going to say serial print. This time we're going to say motion equals, and then we can say serial print line motion value. I'd forgotten a semicolon here. So what's going to happen here is going to print out the line. Every time it runs through the loop, it's going to print this out. It's going to print out the line motion equals, and then it's going to call up the value. So if it's on, it's going to say 1. If it's off, it's going to say 0. So what's going to happen, you're going to have two lines. It's going to say rotation, it's going to give the value, and then motion is going to give on or off 0, 1. Okay, now we're going to jump back into the rest of our program. It's going to loop through this each time. Why don't we check our rotation value again, and we'll keep the fact that if it's below 200, we're going to keep it at that the LED pin turns on. And if the value is greater than 800 on the rotation, why don't we say that we're going to turn this new component, the relay pin, we're going to turn it on. Okay, and then next we're going to make things a little bit more complicated. When it's between 200 and 800, the LED is going to flash. And we're going to keep that same thing, but we're going to add an additional check. So if it's between those 2 points, but then we're also going to say if the motion value equals high, then go ahead and turn on and off the LED lights. So what's happening here is it's checking 3 different conditions, and it has to meet them all. So it has to be greater than 200 and less than 800 on the dial, and the motion has to be detected, it's going to be high. If all those 3 conditions are met, then the LED is going to be flashing on and off. So let's copy this. Rather than typing it all out, we're going to copy it and we're going to paste it below. And we're going to do the same thing. So if it's if the rotation is above 200 and if it's below 800, but the motion is low, so there's no motion, then instead of the LEDs turning on and off, we're going to have the relay turning on and off. I think this is adequately complicated. I'm going to go over the program really quick, and then we're going to see how it's actually working. From the top, we have set everything up previous here. And within the loop, it's going to start at the opening bracket. And then it's going to drop down to applying a value based on the reading of that analog pin. The next thing it's going to do is apply a motion value based on the reading of the motion pin or the motion sensor, the PIR sensor. And then it's going to send that information out to the serial monitor by writing the line rotation and then the value behind that. and the LN kind of makes the new line, and so the next line is going to say motion, and then it's going to give it the corresponding value with that. So that's going to be sent out to the serial monitor so we can follow along as to what's happening. Now the program itself, what's being sent out to the components, the first thing it's going to do is check a condition on the rotation. And so if the rotation is reading less than 200, it's going to turn the LED on. If it's reading more or greater than 800, it's going to turn the relay on. If it's between 200 and 800 and it's sensing motion, it's going to turn the LED on and off flashing. And lastly, if the rotational sensor is between 200 and 800 and it does not sense motion, it's going to have a relay turn on and off. So let's upload this. We'll have a look at the components itself, and then we'll go and compare that to the serial monitor. Okay, so in our serial monitor, you can see that the sensor, the rotation sensor, is above 800, which has the relay on, and in the video, you can see that the relay is on. The little red light here, orange light rather. And as we begin to turn this down, we're now having the relay turning on and off because it didn't sense motion. Now that it sensed motion, the three conditions were being met where it was between 200 and 800 on the rotation, and there was motion. Right now there's no motion, it's between 800 and 200, and so the relay is turning on and off. If I move my hand, it's going to trigger the LED again. So if I keep on bringing this dial down to under 200, it's going to just turn the LED on, and everything else is going to turn off. So if we flip back to the serial monitor, you'll notice we're reading 142 on the motion sensor. The LED light is on because we're below 200, and nothing else is happening. There's no motion. Even if there was motion, it doesn't make a difference. But now if we go above 200, there's no motion, so we're between 200 and 800, no motion. That's going to turn on and off the relay. As soon as I move my hand, all of a sudden the LED light is turning on. I stay still, it goes back to the relay turning on and off. And as we bring the dial up, I'm going to turn the dial up, we get beyond 800, and now the relay is on, and we're locked in that position. Often the more complicated things get, the more difficult it is to ensure that there's not conflicting information. You've got to be very careful about how that works. Hopefully this gives a basics to having several components within the mix.